sponsors, by all means, if you want to sponsor shows, get on things. We're happy to promote products, services, Albertan businesses, Western businesses, and we need those subscribers, and they've been doing great. They're just building up. It's showing people have an appetite for something else. They need something new. They're sick of the same old mainstream media. So get on, have a look, and then consider getting a subscription. I keep using the same analogy, but I think it's a fair one to make. You know, wasn't that long ago, we wouldn't think twice about paying for a newspaper subscription to get those things showing up. Then you'd have that mountain of newspapers you'd have to get rid of all the time and everything. This costs less than the old newspaper subscriptions of 20 years ago, and you get better content. So consider subscribing. Other things I'll get to is our sponsors, of course, which is very important. And I'm trying to get that overlay to come up. I don't know how to get that moving. So we got, though, our sponsor is the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. And these guys are standing up for us. I mean, we've got orders in council coming from the Liberal government trying to take away your firearms, to take away your rights, doing backdoor means to do it. Nobody works as hard as the CCFR to fight for your ability to own and use firearms. You know, not just something you can have disabled and displayed on a wall. You want to be able to utilize these, you know, for target shooting, hunting, whatever you please, legal activities. Check out what the CCFR is doing by going to firearmsrights.ca and click Why Join Us. You know, and it's important with these groups. We've got to stand up for our rights on our own because nobody else is going to do it for us. So these guys are doing it, the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. Get over there, check out their site, consider, there we go, there's their logo. Get on there with the CCFR, stand up for your own firearm rights, stand up for the rights of others while you're at it. You know, this is very important stuff. So let's get on to why our governance is a mess. You know, this story is just, I had to check it a couple of times. Is this really true? And it is. So William Amos, those who might remember, was the Liberal member of Parliament who was walking around during, I think it was a parliamentary committee meeting, or it might even have been an actual parliamentary session. So it was on Zoom. He decided to walk around nude and didn't realize that his pecker was hanging out whilst everybody else was watching him. And it made international news. It was quite a story, quite a scene. Well, here we go again. Now he's apparently, and this at least didn't have screen snaps go out, so I don't understand exactly how this happened, but apparently he was taking a leak, and it was caught on camera and broadcast to everybody else. So he was caught with his pecker in his hand yet again. You know, once is a mistake, twice is a pattern and a problem. And now he says it was an accident in his statement, but at the same time, he's saying he's stepping away from his duties as a parliamentary secretary to seek help. Well, if it was just a mistake, what are you seeking help for? But if it wasn't a mistake and you are purposely flashing yourself, yeah, you need help, man. You got some serious issues. I mean, this is bizarre. You know, it really is. And what were you doing? I mean, how did you take your laptop into the bathroom with you? Were you wearing or carrying a selfie stick? I mean, hearing a flush in the background and exposing yourself are two whole totally separate issues. But either way, these are the people who govern us, guys. These are our members of Parliament, and that's a frightening sort of thing. If he really does have some problems, I hope that he does get the help he so clearly needs. You know, hey, I'm with you, buddy. I do not like clothes. My poor long-suffering wife has to deal with me wandering around the house sometimes with nothing on. I know this is giving images to you guys that you don't want to think about as well. It doesn't present as pretty an image as it might have back in the 90s and so on. But even I still know better than times like now when I'm going to be broadcast, or if I'm doing one of the many, many Zoom meetings that seem to be constantly going on in a part of our life. You tend to cover things up before you get into the meeting. It's not that complicated. It's not that hard. Unless apparently you're a Liberal member of Parliament, then somehow it's quite a difficult task to manage for yourself. So I don't know. I guess for some of the Liberal members, it would probably make some of those committee meetings a little more less boring to watch and so on. But it really isn't there. So let's move on to some getting on to our leadership in Ottawa too. So let's talk about socialist hypocrisy. You know, the funniest thing is we've seen this right since the beginning of the pandemic. So much do as I say, not as I do. So, you know, we have really, and that's worthy of a whole other show, we've seen the left-right divide between people who want the state to step in and take care of them and run their lives and tell them what to do. And they've embraced the state for the pandemic, say, please lock us down, tell us what to do, hold me by the hand, take away my rights, and save us all from each other. And Jagmeet Singh has been a very vocal voice for that. Lockdown, 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 masks, shut down businesses, castrate the economy, the usual socialist approach. And here we have pictures of Jagmeet Singh unmasked with somebody outside of his household having very close contact with the gentleman. Whoa, really? You know, this gets really tiresome. We've seen this in the States. We've seen it with most often, it's the left-wing politicians who keep telling us things, and then you find out they were at a hairdresser's, or they were at a crowded restaurant, or they held a house party. These examples keep coming over and over and over again. It's ironic, you know, you'd think it would be conservative politicians who are getting caught because they're the ones who are pushing back against the lockdowns, against the restrictions. They'd be the ones less inclined to take it seriously. But no, it's always these bloody lefties. Hypocrisy at the extreme. But we see it on every level. I mean, Black Lives Matters. You know, these guys call themselves Marxists, and then you find out one of their main leaders has a collection of mansions. That's nothing new. You know, the leaders in the Soviet Union always had themselves some nice houses too. Going back to Orwell, some people are indeed more equal than others. Getting on to who's more equal than others. The Stampede, you know, and that's something that it sounds like some form of it is going to be on. And, of course, the left is going wild. They're doing cartwheels. They're going crazy about it. Oh, Kenny's going to kill everybody. Look, we had 4,000 people come to Ty Northcott's rodeo weeks ago. It was fine. No problems. It didn't turn into a super spreader event. In fact, these things are mythical. You see more unicorns than you see super spreader events, whatever the hell they are. You know, they're just something that people keep bringing up to try and keep instilling fear and justifying further lockdowns. It didn't turn into one. The Stampede's not going to turn into one. The Sylvan Lake gathering of people didn't turn into one. The people in Toronto down there didn't turn into one. The Texan baseball games with tens of thousands of people didn't turn into super spreader events. I'm just tired of hearing about these things. Guys, you got to be able to point to a couple that actually happened before you can keep trying to freak us out about these things. They don't happen. So the Stampede's coming, though. Nenchi's going wild as usual. Man, he's going to be more agonizing than ever in this last 6 months in office. And his little underling there, Gondek, who wants to replace him. So he's on the Stampede board. And you got to remember the Stampede board, this is a bunch of appointees. It's an honor position. These are the connected Calgary people. Unfortunately, these aren't the people grounded in reality. These aren't the people suffering under these lockdowns. These are people with guaranteed salaries, as usual. The people who lock us down are the people who don't have to worry about paying their own bloody bills. So they can't stop the Stampede. Kenny seems to have pushed along too far with that, but they've shut down every other aspect. Well, we're going to shut down the grandstand show. We're going to pull the rug out from under the chuck wagon races, and chances are they're going to stop the parade. They'll do everything in their power, at least, to make it as miserable as possible. So yeah, we're holding it, but we don't want people to have a good time. It's all politics. It has nothing to do with health. They just want Jason Kenney's moves to be as negatively received as possible, and that's what they're doing. So this will be 2 years in a row. The chuck wagon races, lockdown, shut down. These guys, and I think a lot of people want the chuck wagon races to come to an end. Animal activists, others such as that. This is just a great pretense for it. You know, maybe we won't do it through legislation. We can just bankrupt them through shutting it down year after year like this for the sake of the pandemic. If we can hold the rodeo part, we can hold the bloody chuck wagon races. If we can hold the rodeo part, we can hold the grandstand show. But they shut it down. And again, it's political. They don't want the Stampede to be a success. They really don't. The people, the ones who are dominating these boards, committees, commissions, you got to remember, these are ones that came in from the city of Calgary, municipal politics. Nenchi, he despises Kenny. He despises conservatism. He despises individualism. He wants to have these lockdowns. I mean, this is the man who supports having the mask mandate all the way to 2022. The city put the law into 2022. They're going to have to sit down and meet. If this pandemic keeps going down as we anticipate and hope it will, at some point the city hall is either going to make us wear masks in Calgary all the way until 2022, or they will actually have to sit and reconvene and repeal that gross law that he extended. And this was months ago, all the way to the end of the year. So yes, he doesn't want to see the Stampede being a success. It undercuts all the crap he's been doing all year. He wants people to go down and have a terrible time. He wants money to be lost. And I'm not going along those lines of where it got too far with Madhu. I don't think they're hoping for mass infections. They're not hoping for people to die. These guys are human, but they do want it to be a failure. They don't want to see Kenny succeed in anything. They've been rubbing their hands together, hoping that Notley can get back in. And as things go badly, it looks perhaps a little more likely. It's hard to say. Sorry, people messaging me. Where the heck was I there? So either way, these guys want to undercut any moves to reopen. The bottom line is that somebody said, I saw a comment on it the other day too, and Notley is just something else. If Kenny got up one morning and said the sky was blue, she would be up very shortly afterwards to say, no, it's pink. There's opposition, absolutely, and that's their role, and it's there to be critical. But then there's blind opposition, there's partisan opposition, there's hysteric opposition, ideological opposition, which means there's no reasoning. They're just going to oppose no matter what. And that's what we have right now. That's what the world's become in a sense. I mean, we saw the Trump derangement syndrome. We've got the Kenny derangement syndrome going on now too. Not 100% of the things Trump did were wrong. But if you listen to his opponents, there was nothing that man could do that they would ever even at least just quietly accept. It was wrong no matter what. Well, the hysteric anti-Kenny people, and again, hey, I'm not some big defender of Kenny. I mean, the Western Standard has not exactly been friendly to the UCP government on a number of fronts. But we'll applaud them when they're doing some things correctly, at least. We're not going to undercut every possible move he does. We can't. It's not healthy for the democracy. It's not healthy for any of us. So we're going to watch, it's going to be a very bizarre summer. The irony of what I see is particularly in municipal politics, because a lot of the ones that are celebrating the shutting down of the chuck wagons and the ones that are saying that Jason Kenney's being irresponsible and that he's shutting down or opening up too early, I bet you a lot of those ones who are campaigning for their seats are suddenly going to be showing up at the Stampede pancake breakfast, flipping pancakes and serving sausages, because that's a critical campaign period. That's where you meet people face to face. That's where you humanize yourself. These are campaign opportunities that don't cost your campaign much. You get lots of face time with Calgarians and voters. And, it humanizes you. I mean, there's nothing better than giving somebody a cold rubbery pancake and some bacon after they waited in line for 45 minutes. That's a Stampede tradition. It's what we do. But those who have issues with the Stampede opening and so on, I'll be watching for that. I'm watching you guys, you candidates, you sitting councillors and so on, who are critical of the reopening, saying it's too soon, saying the Stampede is irresponsible. And if I see you guys out there glad-handing, campaigning, and making use of the Stampede for your campaign, after you said the Stampede was irresponsible in opening up, I'm going to be calling you guys out on it. So as far as I'm concerned, every candidate who has criticized the Stampede saying it's irresponsible and opening up early better not be seen down there. You better not be at a pancake breakfast. You better not be at any of those Stampede events, glad-handing and campaigning, because you said it was irresponsible, and that would mean by token, you were being irresponsible. So we'll wait and watch. Either way, I'm going into this, as much as I rant and I'm crabby, I'm going into things with optimism. We're seeing some reopening. We're seeing a timeline. We might have a bit of a life this summer, and we might enjoy ourselves. So ranting aside, I see Caylan's joined me in the lobby there. And as I said, she's going to be coming in. We're going to talk about some education things. So let's get her in there. Hey, Caylan, how you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you, Cory?
Oh, good. Like I said, it's therapeutic. I get my ranting out, get it off my chest, and I feel better for the rest of the day. I make everybody else miserable, but that's what my job is. So I'm glad you came on to join me. It's a big subject, and you put that out on Twitter. And I'm just was happy to see it and discuss this at length because, on a number of levels, we're coming out of the pandemic. We need some policy reform. We need to re-examine a whole lot of things. And one area that we're seeing with a lot of push and pull, it's not necessarily pandemic related, but it still is the education system. It's so rigid. It's so inflexible and so challenging. We should really be looking at ways to change how it's done. And what you were promoting, I guess I'll start into that, was the Calgary Classical Academy. So a charter school system, which would be, maybe explain a bit about charter schools and what you're looking to get going there.
Sure. So you talk about the education system being rigid, and in some ways, Alberta is actually better than a lot of other provinces in Canada. I think we're the only province in Canada that has public charter schools. So the idea here is that if you have a unique constituency of students with particular aptitudes or needs, or a unique pedagogical approach, or different kinds of content that you want to teach, you can apply to the Ministry of Education to set up a charter school and operate with a little bit more autonomy and flexibility than what's available within the regular public system. But they're still publicly funded and they're tuition-free schools. So they're available to all students who sort of meet the requirements or who want that kind of education. And so this particular idea came about. I've been talking about it with a number of parents and a couple teachers and classical education enthusiasts for a while. The idea of starting a classical education program in Calgary. This has become very popular in the United States over the last several years. There are some very, very successful classical charter networks in the US, and there's nothing analogous here though. And so that's kind of where the idea initially came from.
Yeah. So has it been met with, good response so far, enthusiasm and support? Or
so far, yeah. So we're still in an application phase. The application is due. The initial application is due on June 1st, on this coming Tuesday, and before then, we need to get statements of interest or intent from parents who would want to enroll their kids in this kind of program. So we just launched a website last Friday, I think, a very soft launch, and have already had a lot of parents signing up and a lot of teachers reaching out too, saying that this is precisely the kind of school they want to be teaching in.
Well, that's great. And, it's something I've seen. And as you said, yeah, I mean, Ontario, I don't believe they have the charter school options. Alberta's got its separate school thing. It was made initially on a religious basis, but at least it opened the door to having more than one system within one province. I find it funny, you listen to a lot of educators, teachers, and they point out rightly that different students, different kids need different means of teaching in order to excel. That you can't use a rubber stamp. Not all of them respond to teaching in the same ways, and you need to be flexible with that. They particularly point that out a lot when it comes to standardized testing, which they oppose, at all fronts, because as they say, it doesn't apply to every kid. But then as soon as you talk about, well, let's talk about providing individual unique options for them, then suddenly the unions rise up and say, absolutely not. It has to be one overwhelming public uniform system. Well, guys, pick a lane here. I mean,
the key to understanding that is that charter school teachers cannot be members of the ATA. So the ATA naturally is interested in protecting its interests, and to give an idea as well, you'd mentioned the Catholic boards. So charter schools are as a rule, they're not denominational. They don't have a particular religious affiliation, and there's a variety of them. There are sort of arts-focused charters. There are charters for gifted and talented students, for students who have special needs, as well as some that focus on arts, STEM. I think there's a newly approved charter in the Edmonton area, in the rural area, that focuses on that's sort of an agricultural orientation vocationally. And what this one would do is, when I say it's a classical charter, that means that there's an explicit emphasis not just on on developing students' cognitive aptitudes and fostering intellectual excellence. There's a real focus on moral and aesthetic excellence as well. It's centered on a great books program, which means students are exposed, they're put into direct conversation with the really enduring classical works of art and literature and philosophy from around the world. A lot of classical schools are very Western canon focused, so we would hope to have something that's a little bit broader in scope and expand the canon. And taught using a trivium approach, which is the sort of the classical grammar, logic, rhetoric, progression, teaching students, giving them a really strong base of knowledge, and then teaching them how to reason clearly and engage in actually good arguments and discern between good and bad forms of argument and use their logic sort of correctly. And then finally, the rhetoric stage, they become proficient communicators and become persuasive in communicating. And it's also a bit unique, and there's a very strong focus in our proposal on arts, music, drama, dance, fine arts, poetry, a strong outdoor component, and a no smartphone policy, because it's very hard to be reading great books when you're distracted by smartphones and social media. So.
Yeah, and that goes outside of the classroom as well. And I'm a terrible sinner for that myself. But I mean, no, and that all sounds fantastic. And clearly it's only modeled to certain types of students are going to have an aptitude for such a liberal arts intensive program like that. But for those who need it, I mean, it would just be a godsend. I mean, it's very specified. They're certainly never going to get that sort of environment in the regular public system, nor should the public system try to bring in such an intensive focus on that, because most students would shy from it. I just love the pursuit and the ability to come up with these specialized types of courses for students. And I'm quite excited about it, especially when you talk about the reasoning. I mean, a lot of what seems to come in school and it's fallen into is, yes, you consume data and then regurgitate it for a test and pass. Well, that's great. And some kids are very good at that. And there's roles for that sort of thing going forward. But to be able to reason and come up with your own conclusions after consuming it and going further with it, that's a whole other art, and it is an art, and it needs to be taught a lot more. So
it does, yeah.
Really good.
And there's an interesting tension animating, and you see this in the curriculum debates in Alberta too. A lot of the pushback against the new curriculum that was proposed comes from people who say who resist the idea that it's such a knowledge-rich program. So the new curriculum has a ton of content. It's extremely content-rich. Students are expected to learn and commit to their long-term memory a huge amount of information, particularly in social studies. So a lot of historical facts. And there are people in education faculties in particular who believe that knowledge is not relevant, not developmentally appropriate, and unnecessary to the development of higher order reasoning skills. And they're wrong.
No, it's a bizarre ideology, but it's spreading.
It's a bizarre idea that has permeated the education faculties, and these are where teachers are taught. So a generation of teachers has been taught, well, I mean, this kind of goes back to John Dewey about 100 years ago, but it's really picked up within the last, I think, 20 years or so, this idea that people don't actually need knowledge, that knowledge is necessarily synonymous with kind of drill and kill rote memorization, and that it's just not necessary. And so they say, kids can learn to think critically and creatively without having acquired a base of knowledge. And that's nonsense. And cognitive science totally refutes this idea. So this is part of what we want to do, is to restore that sort of a solid foundation, a very broad understanding of history, philosophy, ethics, mathematics, the natural sciences. People should learn about the environment. And only once you've acquired that base of knowledge are you actually capable of reasoning clearly about it and thinking critically about it, or drawing connections between these things, or figuring out how to apply your knowledge in other ways. So it's, in that sense, the philosophy is, I mean, I would hope that this is adopted by all public schools, and this government is certainly trying to move in that direction, albeit with an immense amount of pushback.
Yeah, well, that ties it a little bit into kind of what I was ranting about prior to your coming on. There is unfortunately a very polarized political environment right now going on, and anything that the UCP government proposes is going to get vigorous opposition from the established, often organized labor and others, no matter what they do. And it's really sad. We should be looking with a critical eye at the entire thing. If we really do have the focus and goal of having students graduate with a very workable skill set, specific to them, then we should be at least examining these things. But that discussion really gets shutted down pretty quickly.
Yeah. It's the politicization of the new curriculum is, and the, in some cases, outright misinformation that's been promulgated about it is very frustrating. I mean, this is a curriculum that really fixes huge deficiencies in the way that we've been teaching math and literacy. Something like 30% of Alberta students in grade 3 are not reading at their grade level, and they will probably never catch up because we've been teaching it wrong. We haven't been following what are proven methods. And the social studies aspect has received most of the flack, but there too, this is an enormous improvement over what's been done in Alberta, and certainly over the proposed curriculum that the NDP offered, which, if you look at it, had virtually no content. And I think this is something most parents don't understand. They intended to teach abstract skills in a vacuum without ever specifying what students are supposed to be learning.
Yeah, you have to, as you said, have that base before you can move on to the higher levels, really, and process and make use of the education you had. Something that comes down to it, as you said, though, the ATA isn't involved with the charter system. That's part of where the pushback comes to a degree too. And it should be clarified, we've got an unusual hybrid in Alberta. It's called the Alberta Teachers Association, and it's a professional association, but at the same time, they're juggling, they are a union. They have the ability to strike, they take dues, they are a labor union as well, which I feel is something that really needs to be rectified in Alberta. In my view, it should separate these two entities because they should have two completely different interests. I mean, the union's interest is in the teachers and the labor, and so be it. And that's a human right that's very important. But the Teachers Association, in that case, those should be a separate organization. And that would be perhaps what's going to speak a little more to concerns about curriculum or teaching methods and things such as that. But right now, it's kind of locked in the union interest is kind of dominating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I risk getting a little bit out of my depth here, but I think Alberta is also the only province that has actually carved out a specific role for the ATA within our Education Act. So the union in some ways holds an unusual amount of influence already in Alberta, and obviously a huge amount of resources. And you know, I don't want to give anyone the impression I'm denigrating teachers when I talk about the union and what their interests are. These are very different things. But yeah, it can certainly be an obstacle to, I think, a lot of the types of reforms that would be very useful. You know, one area is in teacher training and certification. It's kind of obscene to me that you could be, for example, a PhD in English literature. You could teach at university, and you're not allowed to teach at high school English. You would have to, if you wanted to teach in high school, and a lot of academics today do, you would have to take 2 years out of your life mid-career and go and earn a Bachelor of Education if you wanted to be able to teach in high school. And this is, I've had a couple of the people who've reached out to us about this charter academy are in precisely that position. They have doctorate degrees in relevant fields, and they say they would love to teach at a middle or high school level at a classical academy because they want to teach a great books program. They want to be introducing these kinds of works to young minds, and they're not allowed to, even in a charter school or in an independent school in Alberta. And even British Columbia changes that. People with advanced degrees in BC have a much easier path into the profession if they want to be teaching. So there's a lot of ways I think that this could become, as you said at the outset, it's a little bit rigid still, and this is certainly one of the areas where that rigidity is apparent.
Well, there's a bit of an irony in that a lot of frustrated parents and ones concerned about the system and so on. You know, there's a growth in homeschooling that's been happening. We're seeing some of that with the remote learning as well. And I mean, it takes an incredible amount of dedication on the part of a parent to take that on. And I imagine some parents are fantastic teachers at home, but to be honest, some of them might not be that great. But they qualify as long as they're following some degree of curriculum standards in order to go forth and do that. Yet somebody with a PhD can't, if it's in a structured environment, doesn't qualify to become a teacher. I mean, that's really limiting and seems kind of absurd.
Really, yeah, absurd is, I think, the right word. And I think the teachers union might say that this is necessary to protect the it's a professionalization thing, right? They want to make sure that all teachers have teaching certificates. Well, teaching certificates didn't exist until 60 years ago. Bachelor of Education programs weren't a thing. You got a regular degree, you learn specific content, and you go to a normal school. And so the idea that teachers need a teaching certificate, I'm sure that there are some programs that are useful, but if you look through the curriculum offered by in Bachelor of Education programs, I think a lot of people would be quite shocked at the kind of curriculum that they're offering, that they're mandating teachers go through. Today, it's a lot of critical theory, particularly in the last few years, and they're not actually learning very much content. I think part of the reason why there's been some pushback to the new curriculum in Alberta is a lot of teachers didn't learn this stuff themselves. They're expected to be able to teach about ancient Mesopotamia and the Qin dynasty in China, I think starting in grade 1. And this is material that they've never encountered. They didn't learn this in their undergraduate degrees. And it's actually a very steep learning curve, legitimately. So I think this is another thing that I would like to see is that teachers are given the resources and the support they need to be able to teach this kind of content-rich curriculum, but also that ed schools actually start teaching this kind of material and requiring it.
Well, setting aside the fascinating Qin dynasty, I don't remember that from grade 1 as well. But it's something that came up recently. Actually, was some of the degree of teaching standards. There's quite an issue breaking out in Ontario, and that made the news with a teacher who was forlornly pictured hanging on a swing, sadly, because she feared she might lose her job because they required she would have to prove a grade 9 mathematics proficiency on a test. That's concerning. I understand the teaching is broad and there's a number of subjects, but I mean, we're not talking about matric. We're not talking about high level math. That's getting towards the end of the basics in grade 9. And I think any teacher should be capable of that. And math is a hard one. It's a use it or lose it thing. I mean, I used to be a surveyor. I can't remember the trig and formulas I used to use back in the 90s when I surveyed. I got to admit, back then I could memorize them. I could go out, I could utilize them. But again, what are all those professional development days for then, if not keeping up on these sorts of things? What
Do you know what they're doing with their professional development days?
Well, usually I used to see them in my pub when I owned one.
I saw I've talked to teachers from a couple school boards, one in Edmonton, one in Calgary, and I won't say which ones, where they were mandating that the teachers read what some people describe as neo-racist text, like Ibram X. Kendi or Robin DiAngelo during their professional development days, or that they read texts that promulgate ideas of race essentialism that tell them that they should privilege certain students in the classroom on the basis of heritable characteristics like their ethnicity. This is what teachers in Alberta are doing during their PD days, and this is mandatory. And again, this is something that I think if parents understood this, they would be up in arms. But most of us don't have the time or the bandwidth to be looking into this. And a lot of some of the teachers I've spoken to say they are afraid of speaking out. They don't believe this is a good use of their time. They don't believe in the ideology that has sort of captured their schools increasingly. But they are afraid that they will face professional repercussions if they dissent from this ideology. So this is another part of the problem that this is responding to. A lot of my parent friends have told me, they just say, I don't trust the public education system anymore. And again, that is not to impugn individual teachers. There are fantastic teachers everywhere, but that a lot of these institutions have been unable to resist a kind of ideological capture. And so there has to be some way to get out of that.
Yeah, I mean, I want teachers of my kids or grandkids to, be keeping themselves up to date on grade 9 math rather than critical race theory. If they want to take that as a sideline, fine. Those are separate individual. And again, it is a theory, but these things get taught or passed on to teachers as if these are facts to follow. And again, it gets to that rigid thing. I mean, if you didn't have such a almost monopoly system with provision, then teachers who are concerned with that can spread out. Or again, of course, more importantly, parents can move their kids to different institutions if they don't like what's coming down the line there.
Exactly. Yeah.
And vote with their student, I guess, in a sense. And again, getting back to a bit of the different learning and different standards, I was a trouble student. I was a pain in the butt. I do apologize to many of the teachers who had to endure and suffer through me.
My grade 9 teachers were absolute saints. Like, it's really, in retrospect, unbelievable how patient they were with me.
Yeah, and I had a C average throughout most of my school time. For 1 year, my parents shipped me off and outsourced me to a private boarding school out in BC where they applied heavy discipline to me. My marks shot rate quite high for that year. And then I came back and then actually floundered again back in the public system. But that was just me. But it's another example of different students need different environments in order to come into their own, I guess you could say, to a degree. And we just aren't doing that. And the funny thing, when I finished high school, I didn't know what a trade was. I didn't know what an apprenticeship was. I'd never been taught. I didn't know what a journeyman was. Most of what I knew from, journeyman apprentices and so on was from fantasy novels. And I thought it was the means you took to becoming a master magician eventually. But school did not teach me a single thing about those options in the career path. I mean, I don't know if those were necessarily the options that were best for me or not, but I should know those coming out. And I don't believe they're teaching much more of that today, if I can recall.
No, and again, I think this is an area where this government in Alberta has tried to remedy that. They've tried to say that, I think they recognize that university actually isn't for everyone, and that for those who are not interested in pursuing pure academic streams, there needs to be some viable path there. And so I think the government has tried to sort of revalorize the trades as legitimate, desirable professions that have real value and meaning, and create more pathways for people, I think, beginning in high school to start that kind of vocational training, and pursue careers in the trades. So that's a wonderful development as well.
Yeah, and then take the stigma away. I mean, it's a good line of work. You don't see a plumber driving an old beat up car. They're doing all right for themselves, and they're very secure.
Absolutely.
But there is a bit of that attitude almost. It's either you're going to be a doctor or you're going to be a janitor, and there's nothing in between. And by the way, there's absolutely nothing with earning a living as a janitor either. It's honest work.
No, exactly. This is another one of the things that was the impetus for me to get involved with this initiative was the way that we talk about education so often is it's always about sort of preparing people for a job market. And that to me reflects a very sort of flat view of the purpose of education. The idea that it's intended to make people sort of narrowly useful so they can go out and get a job and thrive materially. And that's important. And a good school should obviously prepare people to be able to do that. But that's not really what a good education is. I think a lot of my educational philosophy can be summarized in a couple Confucian aphorisms. And one of them is, Confucius says, 君子不器, an educated person is not a tool. And education isn't about making someone narrowly useful. It's not utilitarian. It is an emancipatory undertaking. And a liberal education is supposed to, as the name suggests, make people free, make them, impart to them the virtues and the habits that are befitting free citizens. And as Seneca says, really the only education that is worthy of the name is one that imparts wisdom. It is the pursuit of wisdom. That's what education is about. And so that's where we're going with this as well, is it's an academically rigorous program. We'll happily prepare people to compete in a modern job market. And yet that's not the sort of the main teleological orientation. That's not the purpose or the ultimate end. The ultimate end is to help people figure out how to live meaningful lives in whatever vocation that may be.
Yeah, well, and taking in the information, being able to do that's great, but it's processing it. That's when you get the wisdom, when you've come to your own conclusions. So I would hope and imagine that a school like this would be a little more immune to some of the unfortunate cancel culture that's going on. I mean, some of the classics and things that are getting set aside. I think of an incident that happened with To Kill a Mockingbird being shut out of classrooms, and there was a beautiful tweet that somebody with an account that was called Atticus Finch. And because there was an article with the headline saying, this is being pulled from classrooms because it makes people uncomfortable. And the Atticus Finch Twitter account said, that was the effing point. And they're right. Yes, it is an uncomfortable story, but it's a fantastic one. It's one that showed what actual institutionalized racism was, and rather than what we're talking about and considering it today. And it was stories like that helped us get away from that sort of mindset. Exactly. We're actually pulling it now. We're not letting people read that because we don't trust our students to read that and interpret it correctly. Apparently, they're going to read it and take the side of the racists somehow. And that's wrong, and it's going to harm kids.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And you see this as well, that there are a lot of schools that are trying to cancel the classics as well. That Homer shouldn't be taught in schools, and this kind of idea. And in some cases, the justification provided is that the Western classics somehow support a system of white supremacy or something. As though it never occurred to them, as I said, that they should just expand the canon and incorporate more great works from other cultures and traditions. It's a sort of repudiationist philosophy. And that worries me because it's sort of, when you do that, when you cut people off from being able to understand and converse with prior generations, they become unable to link with those who came before them. They lack a sense of appreciation for how precious and how fragile the civilization that we've inherited is, and how much went into building this very free, open, pluralistic, secure society. So that's part of why we want to teach classics, part of why we want to teach a sort of a rigorous and sequential history program, is so that people actually have an understanding of how we got to where we are, and so that they are able to sort of break out of the very narrow and sometimes very parochial confines of the present. There's a phrase that is sort of uttered in a slightly different context, but G.K. Chesterton talked about the degrading servitude of being a child of one's own time, of viewing everything through the lens of your own society and through the values and prejudices of your own society, and how humiliating it is when you're confined in that way. So by conversing with the classics, people are able to break out of that. They're able to actually consider things from different perspectives truly and inhabit different perspectives.
Well, yeah, we have to see how we evolved. I was in Florida. I hadn't heard actually of a pushback against Homer. And I mean, to look at that for an example on so many levels where it applies, as you say, you start something and you can look forward. I mean, the Odyssey, is one of the first actually classic books that I read that is enjoyable. It's a fun read. It's a good novel.
Yeah, I mean, my 5-year-old is really into the Cyclops. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. There's a whole lot packed into there. I mean, you can reread that as you get older and read more into it and realize what they were getting at. And I mean, my daughter is in university taking theater right now. Well, how many creative productions were really actually based on the Odyssey and an interpretation of it? I mean, it's the foundation of so many things. So why on earth would we rob kids of being able to read that and see this was one of the things that built Western modern society? It was a pivotal book. I think you must have seen this too. In Alberta, the second grade curriculum, as proposed, includes a teaching of it teaches about Genghis Khan and the Mongol Empire and the great Eurasian trade and migratory routes, as well as about Rome. And there was a huge amount of pushback from teachers and from unions, really, and from some others saying, "Why are students learning about Rome? This isn't relevant." And I'm transitioning from Greece to Rome here with this example, but if you want to be able to understand the references and the allusions contained in the last 2,000 years of Western literature, I mean, you're basically left sort of illiterate if you don't understand what those references are, and you have to understand the history of Rome if you want to get that. If you want to be able to walk through the Louvre and understand what's being depicted, you need to know this history. And so these people who stress like relevance, again, it's a really I think impoverished view of what an education is, that they're viewing it solely in utilitarian terms. Say, it's not, you don't need to know this if you want to work as an engineer. Well, but you need to know it if you want to be a literate human being. Well, and again, the applications you might not think of initially, but they come into play in other areas. I mean, again, the Divine Trilogy, I mean, with where that applies to, again, so many modern things and interpretations of, there should be a basis. But if we're moving away from that, it's concerning. And you got to work your way up to that. I mean, that one's a drudge. Getting through the Odyssey was fun. Reading Inferno was a difficult task, but it's a progression. As you said, you start and you move up through these things. You got to take things in order. In a sense as well, and we're moving away. To say nothing of the fact, I should add. I guess I recently wrote an essay where I talked quite a lot about Dante and the Divine Comedy, and I talked about the value, particularly when you're going through trials and hardships in life, of being able to draw on these classic works. That they provide an incredible sense of consolation and camaraderie in the darkest times of our life. This is why we learn poetry. This is why we study classics. And I weep to think about people who are denied access to that because someone in some education faculty decided that this isn't relevant to their lives. Yeah. We're outside of the relevance again, just getting a bit back to the controversial, and I use just kind of a more recent analogy. Social media, Facebook. There's a page that somehow I happened upon, and it's a bunch of people celebrating the old Andy Capp cartoons. I don't know if you remember those. They used to be a comic strip in the newspapers. It was English based back in the 40s and 50s, and I think it ran all the way into the 80s. So when I was a kid, reading newspapers, I'd read these Andy Capp things. And in reading those, holy cow. I mean, I used to chuckle at those as a kid. They are so grossly almost offensive, politically incorrect. I mean, this is a man who is a celebrated drunkard who literally is borrowing from his wife chronically, trying to find his way out of ever doing a job. And they literally would physically beat on each other. He would chase her with a cricket bat in these cartoons. And this was what was acceptable then.
Yeah.
But in reading that and looking at those, at least I could say to myself, boy, we've come a long way in the last 50 or 60 years. And I don't see anybody reading those and looking at those and saying, "Oh, well, this is acceptable. I can go after my wife with a cricket bat or force her to go to work so I can sit around in the pub." And yeah, he's a chronic cheater. It's quite something. I was astounded. Like, I used to laugh at this. Was it really that bad? And apparently it was. But we can't ban these things because we don't know what we used to do and how we improved and got away from them. I mean, I'm not saying we should encourage kids in school to read Andy Capp, but we just got to get away from the cancel culture that stops all of these publications or different views on things.
Yeah, and that's why too. This is, I think, one of the explicit commitments of this kind of school is a commitment to open inquiry and truth seeking. That it's good civil conversation has to be a really intrinsic part of this. The Socratic method being integrated into lessons, so that people actually do come to recognize that you can disagree with people and still be friends, and that you're allowed to make mistakes in the process of intellectual discovery, and it's not going to be the end of your life. So this is an explicit commitment. And I don't want to say it's necessarily a commitment to sort of free speech. It's a commitment to free inquiry in the pursuit of truth, and exercising that within the context of a community of friendship and camaraderie.
No, it's very positive in that route rather than adversarial all the time. It's ironic again, and I think though adding some competition could actually lose some of the adversarial. I mean, a proper competition, sportsmen, you can, or sports people, you can get at it and just try to kill each other out in the field and then go have a beer afterwards. Cause it was just, hey, we don't hate each other because we competed. We just differed. Going further with educational choice, I just want to voucher systems, pure outright getting into something like that, where educational dollars will directly follow the student and the parents have full guidance on that. Do you think that's a system that's worthwhile and something we could move towards down the road?
I've never seen a compelling argument against them. I mean, they're certainly controversial because some people will say that private schools that are exclusive and only available to certain students will benefit disproportionately from this. I think private schools in Alberta are currently funded at a rate of, I think it's about 60% per pupil of what they would get in the public system. So in that sense, I think I kind of understand that pushback, but I don't find it a particularly compelling argument. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, I think there's a lot of politics of envy tied into that. And I guess if a person really is of the belief that everybody should just have a full equal opportunity to every possible system, if that means lowering the standards for everybody else in order to do so, then that's worthwhile. Because one of the areas that it would be challenging, I guess, and frustrating is if you're living in a rural area, a town of 5,000 or so, and you've got a child that you see some real great specialized schools, but they're not going to set up in your town. There's just not enough people for that specialty there. So your child misses out on that particular opportunity. But that's a choice in choosing to live rural. I mean, you have fewer health facilities there and fewer post-secondary and everything else. I mean, that just comes along with those things. I mean, by the same token, I think a voucher school, maybe a small private institution could set up that really does service rural demand and needs. I that's where I'm sitting on the vouchers. It's more of an envy thing. You feel that I can't handle it if that person's getting something better than I am. So let's just drag everybody down to the same level.
Yes, I think that is for some people can be a very strong motivating factor. Yeah.
I mean, that ties into giving alternative health provision options as well. And I've had those debates, but it's that same mindset that stops it. I had a discussion, I've had many, and I fight with people. Politics is what I do. And it was an extended one with a very vocal person fully against having any private provision of health. And I laid it out. I showed that, look, how about, I mean, if I can show and demonstrate that everybody will get faster treatment if we can bring this option in, everybody will go through the line more quickly. There will be universal coverage. Nobody's paying out of pocket, but some people will be able to pay and jump the line. You'll still get up there faster, but the other fella is going to get in there even faster than you, but they're paying out of pocket. Would you support that? And I'll give him points for being honest. He said, no, I can't handle it. No, absolutely not. I would rather everybody else waited a longer time than accept that somebody could reach into their wallet and get to the front of the line. But they're actually paying for you to get through there faster too.
Yeah.
So
this is one thing that I think a lot of people don't understand about even existing provisions for independent schools, what some people call private schools in Alberta, is they say, well, everyone should belong to the public system. Well, that actually costs taxpayers more, because taxpayers pay less for a student in an independent school than they do in a public school. And that person potentially gets access to an education that will suit their needs better. But I do understand the kind of reflexive sense that some people may feel that that's still somehow unfair. And then in that sense, maybe that actually is an argument for vouchers. I'm sort of thinking this through as we talk. So.
Yeah. Well, I believe it's somewhat limited. I mean, there's some truth to it. What would happen is surely some exclusive schools would set up and a person takes their whatever it might be, $6,000 voucher to that school, and then they have to pay another $20,000 on top of that.
Exactly. Yeah.
And that school is going to be able to afford to draw some very high caliber teachers, perhaps have more facilities that are, of a higher degree and level than other institutions have. Yeah, that'll happen. But it kind of gets me back to that. Well, get over it. That's a smaller realm. I mean, the majority of people aren't going to pull another $20,000 out of their pocket to join that. They already are. Those schools, the one I went to on Vancouver Island, I mean, it was...
where did you go?
Shawnigan Lake.
Okay.
So it was an all boys school back then, boarding school. It was a very life-changing thing, but you really got top of the line teachers and instruction and attention in a facility like that. No, not everybody could necessarily.
I would guess that none of your teachers had education degrees.
I wouldn't know. I never asked, but I could guess that. I mean, most of them were from England, and most of them, again, were familiar areas such as, with Oxford and Cambridge and such. And yes, not everybody can necessarily go to a place like that. But I mean, nothing is better. I think we're of similar mindsets of just that basic philosophy of some degree of honest competition will make everything rise. If we've got these different schools all around that are trying to draw in these students, they're seeing them as an asset. They need those parents to choose their place. Yeah, exactly. Then they need to find that specialty.
Yeah. And I remember talking to someone about this, and I used that same language. I said that having the options of charter and independent schools introduces more competition. And he was a teacher, and he responded viscerally to the idea of education as a marketplace. To him, this meant you're sort of commodifying children and commodifying education, and that's not the idea. But the principle holds still to some degree that if you have a monopoly where there are no real incentives to produce excellent teachers, to make sure that they receive the kind of training they need to offer good programs, then it won't happen. And this is one of the things that charters are intended to do, is they help create innovation within the system, and they provide sort of guideposts for some of the different ways that you can do things. And ideally, you come out of this with measurable, improved results that maybe, hopefully, can then be adopted by the public system where they're transferable. So it's kind of it's in that sense, it's, again, I don't want to use the term experimental in terms of implying that you're experimenting with kids' education, but it's introducing innovation into the system and being able to show these techniques, these pedagogical approaches produce better results and can produce better results for any child. And that's part of the goal here as well.
Yeah, well, and to be honest, again, I guess it depends on the ambition and motivation of some individual teachers and so on. But it would make a competitive market to draw teachers, which, in a sense, I mean, I believe could make it better for all of them. Again, the union environment doesn't like that attitude. But if you've got charter schools that are actually starting to pull out and draw some of the more talented or specialized teachers and pulling them from the other public schools, well, then the public school should respond by saying, well, what can we do to maintain you here? What can we do better to keep you in our institution because you're important to us? That would make for a better teaching environment in general. I mean, as far as the labor aspect goes, there's nothing better for a worker than having a few options. You got to be able to have that license to tell the boss, you know what, if I'm going to work for the guy down the street. That's what raises compensation or workplace, comfort levels and things such as that. And when you've got a standardized system, in some senses, it can make it worse because they got nowhere else to go if they wanted to leave somewhere.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I'll finish up with though. Some people have been asking with the school that you're looking to get rolling and promoting. Which location, or have you got something in mind for that yet?
So the location is again, we're still in the early phase of the application process, and the location isn't yet set. Most of the parents who've expressed interest so far are in Northwest or Southwest Calgary, so those two quadrants of the city. So that might have some bearing on the location. Most likely, the interim measure would be we would be looking for space within an existing or underutilized Catholic or public school board building, but we'll be trying to figure that out in the next few months pending approval of this application.
Yeah, well, the inner city, I mean, that's been happening a lot, and a lot of people have been decrying it with that's part of where we might be wasting a lot of education dollars, actually, is funding these very limited used inner city schools because there's just not the population demographic to fill them any longer. But of course, people always go into hysterics, whether it's from even just sentiment because they went to that school when they were younger, or just to being a local person who is one of the few who wants their kid to go there. They influence the local politicians, and they can't close these darn things, or at least change the format of them. And I mean, there's a lot of opportunity because they're smaller schools that can be utilized. With so much free space downtown these days too, I think a lot of opportunity there for creative
things.
Lot of
commercial space, that's
true.
True.
I mean, it could be used. There's a lot of transit options that bring people down there if they could just clean up the addiction problem, and people could perhaps send their kids to an educational institution downtown as well. So again, what was the website with the? So
it's calgaryclassicalacademy.ca. And there's a form there where parents can sign up if they want to join the interest list, and that's sort of to demonstrate that the proposal is viable and that there is a constituency that is interested in this kind of program for their kids. Yeah,
you still have a number of steps to go, but you're on that first step, and I mean it's great. I mean, we're going into I'm trying to look into this horror story as we come out of the pandemic as maybe it's an opportunity though. Let's embrace the creative. Let's look outside the box and let's do new things. And things such as this is one of them right off the bat. After World War I, there was a boom through the 20s. After World War II, there was a boom through the 50s. Maybe after this misery, there's going to be something of a boom of creative spirit and changing some things for the better.
I hope so.
So I appreciate you coming on, and it's always good to talk to you. So maybe keep us up to date on how that's going for you and everything. And, hopefully the approvals keep moving along. Where can we find more information on what you're up to these days?
On what I'm up to? I don't know. What's that? On what I'm up to personally.
Yeah, Jeff.
You can follow me on Twitter at Caylan Ford.
Okay. Great. Well, thanks for joining me. I really hope that gets off the ground. It sounds like a really exciting school that perhaps we could develop some young minds into some great philosophers and keep that whole chain going all the way down the road. So,
I hope so.
Keep fighting the good fight and pushing the good case.
Thank you, Cory.
All right. Thanks. I'll talk to you later. So yeah, that was a great chat, and yeah, let's see here as what do we got? The Albertan here said, yeah, it's class envy dressed up as being in the collective good, and that's always what class envy is, isn't it? Envy, I mean, if we want to get back to philosophical thoughts and negative things and terrible things to take on, envy is the worst. It's among them, whether you're coveting somebody else's girlfriend or you're coveting their home or their job, to admire and aspire to other things is fine. You like that guy's car, you want to earn a living and make the means to get that car. Great, good for you. You know, you want to work your way up the ladder to get to that job. You want to buy that house. You want to take that vacation. But when it's envy, that's a little different. That's bitterness. That's not wanting to bring yourself up to their level. That's wanting to pull them down to yours, you know? And that's unfortunately the basis of the left. I mean, they always talk about it rising everybody up, but that's the reality, is you pull everybody down. And when we reduce these standards and we put everybody into the same bin and force this gross philosophy of an unnatural equality upon them, that's an envy-based thing, even if you're saying it's in good merit. So when you've got, a rigid system, an educational system, a health system that has to make sure everybody's stuffed into the same tin can, even if it's miserable, because you just want to make sure you're miserable together, that's the politics of envy. And unfortunately, that's the basis of the left. It really is. It's funny. They talk about capitalists being focused on money. Nobody's more focused on money than a leftist reaching out saying, give me your money. A capitalist wants to go out and earn the money. They're saying, what product or service can I give to you to get some of your money? A socialist says, I want the state to take your money and give it to me for whatever reason. You know, we see that, we can go farther down the line with universal basic income plans. And this idea that people won't sit on it and do nothing with it. There's a Globe and Mail article, and I can't remember the guy's name, and I've called him out on it a couple times. I should give it the points for his honesty. He went on about saying he's a career student. He's a guy like way up in his 30s. He's got all sorts of letters next to his name, but he doesn't want to work. He says, I want to be a full-time poet. I want a universal basic income. In fact, I'm entitled to a universal basic income so I can sit at home and write poetry. There's nothing stopping you from writing poetry. Get out and sell it, though. Write songs, write books, do something. If your poetry's so crappy that there's not a market for it, too damn bad. Or it's a hobby. You know, read it in coffee shops, do your side thing. I should not be obligated to work and pay a portion of my bills for you to make a living sitting around writing poetry. But that, again, gets to that mindset, that entitlement. And everybody's got to be the same. Well, no, we don't. You know, Frank Zappa gave some great advice. I'm a big Zappa fan. If people wonder about some of my tasteless thoughts and humor, I get a lot of inspiration from Frank. He passed way too early. But one of his things, and I'm probably slaughtering it and paraphrasing, but he was asked in an interview what he would offer as advice for a young musician. And I think he said something like, go out and get a job as a plumber, or a whole number of other things. Is you need to get your basic income, because you're not going to get right into making a living as a musician. You might be one of the few who breaks out, but in reality, you got to have a passion for the music. It's not going to pay your bills initially. It might never pay your bills. So get a solid line of work first. Then you can do those side things. But we're getting this me attitude from a lot of people saying, well, I want to be a musician, so the world's got to pay for me to be one. Well, no, too damn bad. I want to be a poet. I want to be a world traveler. I want to be a career student. At some point, you got to work, or you got to produce something that enough people want to pay voluntarily for what you're doing. Either way, it's a bit of a digression, but it comes down to those attitudes, the issues we've got in our educational system. I really appreciate it. It's great to see Caylan out there pushing, this charter school. It sounds like a very interesting one. It sounds very specialized. Obviously, there's only certain students who are going to, be interested in and who'll be able to embrace and blossom with that specific a curriculum. But isn't it a great one? And same sort of thing. Why don't we have so many others of these charter schools? What if some student is clearly very much into carpentry, plumbing, the trades, or into mathematics? So you do see that in kids. A lot of it starts coming out early, or art and things like that. But let's get those specialized schools then. Let's get them the best teachers for what their thing is. Or some kids who learn differently. Some kids have a hard time learning how to read, but if they get the right teacher and a separate type of teaching, they can pick it up. Same with mathematics. But you stuff them all into the same classroom, and they can't pick it up with the rest of the other students. And you can't pull the rest of the other students down for the other kid who has different and special needs. But we can't get that educational diversity because, as I said, that there's that cognitive dissonance with the teachers' unions, where they keep screaming that every kid's different. We can't do standardized testing, as I started the whole thing. And I agree, they are. But then as soon as you start giving educational options, they flip their lid and say, no, you can't do that. Well, come on, guys, make up your mind. You're half right. I think it starts, that's that Alberta thing, I think, where you got half of a teachers association, you got half of a teachers union, and they're mashed into one organization. The Teachers Association focused on saying, they always say it's for the students, but let's not kid ourselves. The union's there for the teachers and nobody else. And that's fine. That's what a union's for. The association points out that these kids all need different types of learning and more creative ways to do it. But the union says, but we have to keep it all under this standardized thing. You need to separate those institutions. You need to. We have to. We're losing. Yeah. So I want to get on a little bit more. We haven't talked too much about the pandemic. It's a nice break, but I want to be nice to Kenny for a change. We've been beating on him and so on. He's getting it from all directions as usual. A lot of us think there never should have been a lockdown, or it should have been less, or he should have opened last week, and that's all valid and it's all fair enough. But we got to take to some degree what we can get, and he's got a plan. He's got it going. We've got a path, and we could be back to normal in a month and change, and I'm happy about that. I want to see it. And we've got to keep speaking up and pushing for that, because the usual clowns, the usual arseholes are out there. Notley's going crazy. It's irresponsible. People are going to die. No, they aren't. And, Kenny rightly points out, Texas opened right up. They only had 14% of their population had their first shot. This was months ago. And the same voices sounded just like Notley and every other bloody socialist, from Stephen King to Gavin Newsom, yowling on how irresponsible Texas was and how everybody's going to die. It didn't happen, and it won't here. But you got to push back. Kenny only gets nothing but that push from Notley, that push from unions, that push from Nenshi. We have to push them the other way, and reasonably, not running into stores without a mask and getting your ass arrested, not screaming up and down the streets, just saying, yes, we want to open. This is a godsend to businesses. They've been hanging by a thread, the few that are left. So this is good news. These restaurants can open their patios next week, hopefully fairly soon get full service. They're barely hanging in there. The hotels, there's going to be at least some carnies will get to work, and some kids will get their summer job with whatever that scaled down Stampede is. So let's celebrate it and be happy about that. It is a good thing. And again, people thinking it's not fast enough. Well, I'm not, I don't like going to that argument of saying she would be worse, but there's the truth of it. It would be a hell of a lot worse if Nenshi or Notley were in charge of things. So Kenny's taken the chance. I don't think it's that big a chance. It's going to be fine. But they're framing it as that. And look at the media. There's the other thing, to get back to that mainstream media. I listen to the global reports. And what do? They go to every doctor they could find who says it's irresponsible. They go to every person on the street who says this is irresponsible and scary and it's going to hurt things. They just keep the fear going. And they don't go out to interview a business who's saying, oh, thank heavens, I can finally reopen. I was about to go bankrupt. They don't go to the single parent who's saying, oh, I can finally get back to work because living on this CERB, version or whatever it is these days is not cutting it for me. I can get back full time and do my job again and pay my bills. They don't talk to any of these. They talk to every negative clown out there. Yeah, I'm sick of the mainstream media. And look at the crap they feed us. Can't you give us both sides? Is it that hard? So what have we got? I got a long question here. So, I'm on a side rant there, but why not? Dave Beal, so these ones, I can't pull them up on the screen because they're a little long. So he's saying, how does the military feel about Trudeau, O'Toole, Kenny Ford, executive, cooperating with those who clearly cooperated with China to gain? Oh, it's just too much. Agenda 2030, it reads like they're in control. Okay, so we'll get on to some things there. Agenda 20, it was 2021. Let's move on to 2020. I swear the UN names these things to make them sound conspiratorial, just to undercut people when they do criticize it later. There is a lot of truth to it. These things were, it was Agenda 21 initially. They really are UN documents. Look them up. They're there, and they have some very ambitious goals for government control, socialism, individual control. They're there. It's not a conspiracy. Have a look. The only question is how much local politicians are actually influenced by it or taking any of it seriously. Common sense once tells the UN to stick it up their butts. Unfortunately, we have a great void of common sense leadership in politics these days. That goes without saying. But, so when you look at some of the patterns of where ahead and in she goes with some of his stuff, read into it. When people say it's right in Agenda 21, oh, that sounds crazy. Look at it. Look at it, actually. Read Imagine Calgary. You want to read something really bizarre? I broke that whole crazy document down, and I wrote a number of articles on it a few years ago. It's weird. And that Nenshi said that's what he plans his politics on. He said that's what his city planning was based on. Like, you got to read that stuff. Like, it looks like somebody dropped a hit of acid before they wrote it. And the city spent millions on that thing. And it reads, well, what it does read is Agenda 21 of the UN. I'm not talking about a conspiracy. This is what the UN wants to do. We got the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That's getting shoved in there, and I believe it's Bill C10 or C15. Somebody might correct me. No, C10 is the censorship bill. I think C15 is the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. It's brutal. You think we're having a hard time getting anything done in Canada right now with the environment, as far as infrastructure, getting through any Indigenous lands or traditional lands? The definition just keeps spreading out. When we entrench the principles of that UN document, we're screwed. And there was a Native leader who spoke to it, and he said that the best words, and unfortunately I don't have his name on the top of my head here, but he said what that plan will give First Nations, and this is a First Nations leader who was saying it, was far bigger capability to cancel all sorts of stuff, but practically no ability to approve anything. And that's where we're going. So, it's funny because I do decry some conspiracy theorists. I go on about them because there's some crazy conspiracies out there. Some of them are out to lunch. We just got to face it. But there's some other stuff that gets dismissed as conspiracy theories, and it's real. And that crap coming out of the UN is real. It's there for all to read. It's not some bizarre offshoot website with some theorist. It's not some guy in a Nevada desert typing stuff up. It's right there on the UN sites. Have a look. It's real. And we've got a lot of concerns with things, about control and government attitudes. And it's worthy of reading and seeing what does motivate some of our politicians, whether from Trudeau to Nenshi. I don't think Kenny is so sold on those things. He's got his challenges and issues. But then again, Kenny's got a complete abject terror of standing up to Ottawa on things. There was the big thing with that nation motion in Quebec talking about, declaring themselves a nation and then putting it forth in the Constitution. O'Toole, so yeah, that's fine, because he'll do, it's clear, O'Toole will say or do anything if he thinks it'll get him votes, and it's not working. Trudeau said, yeah, Quebec can go ahead and do that. Kenny said, oh, well, Alberta can too, and, we should be under those rates. Okay, well, do it. What are you waiting for? Why don't you do something, Kenny? Let's do it. Let's make Alberta a nation. Or let's declare the language here is English. Or do some of those things that Quebec's do. Why can't we do that? Why can't we have our own distinct society? Talk is cheap, Kenny. And you keep talking. So I'm celebrating the reopening, but yeah, I'm going to give you crap on this. Get out there. Utilize the same provincial tools that Quebec is. You said they have the tools. You said you admire that they utilize them. Well, then do it. What are you waiting for? So here we go. Somebody saying, Cory, enjoy the show. Well, thanks. Okay, I appreciate that. I really do, actually. But do I know anything about Brad Field? Got his card in the mail. So yeah, I did. Somewhat familiar with him. He's coming from a conservative side of things to a degree. He doesn't have a political history that I know of. He's a Calgarian businessman. His policies, the last time I looked, were sort of shallow on specifics, but kind of on the broad principles of smaller government and things like that. He clearly has a sizable budget because we're seeing these general mailers and seeing billboards and things going out there. If I can get him on, I will get him on and talk with them. But to be honest, I don't know a heck of a lot about the guy, but I would consider him one of the contenders. We've got 15 people running for mayor now, or 16 or something. It'd probably be 20 by the time it gets there. When a mayor steps aside, a lot of people throw their hat in the ring, but realistically, we know there's only going to be maybe 4, 5 of them who have kind of a realistic shot at it. And the rest are just kind of out there to get individual messages out there. It's a platform, and, good on them. That's what they can do. But Brad Field, I think he's one of those higher contenders anyways. He's significant among the field. I don't know a lot about him. If people want, I can try reaching out. I did speak to somebody who'd been involved in his team and passed along that I'd like him on the show, but I never got a response after that. So if I get him, and as we get closer to the municipal election, I'm certainly going to be covering it more and talking to more of them as they come on. I have, of course, had Jeremy Farkas on. I've always liked Jeremy and known him for quite some time, and he's been very vocal and advocating for reform in City Hall. I don't expect to ever get Jody Gondek on. I mean, it was on my blog where we broke it early that Stephen Carter was going to be your campaign manager and that she was indeed running for mayor. And that's fine because I'll be outspoken. I mean, I am a columnist. I'm editorial. I do not support Jody Gondek. She's just niche all over again. Just a new version of it, rejuvenated. You want 10 more years of that crap? Put Jody Gondek in there. Otherwise, there's some other interesting contenders, but one that I'll rule out right off the bat is Jody Gondek. And, Davison, he's another one of the counselors who's thrown his hat into the ring on that. He's just kind of a little bluer version of that, but I don't see much more difference, just all more of the same flavor coming out, trying to get that top chair. So, we'll see what happens there. Now, Albertan, get back to my rant with Kenny because he's not here for Alberta. He's here for Canada. To a degree. I mean, Kenny's never pretended not to be a federalist, but the thing is he's not utilizing the tools, though, to even keep Alberta stronger within Canada. This bait and switch, and it's tiresome, and we're sick of it. What was with the Fair Deal panel? It's been years now. Come on, man. Implement at least one of the recommendations. Get it rolling, not striking more bloody commissions, more committees, more hearings, more informational, studies. Do something. Give us a provincial pension plan. Quebec's got one. Come on. Pull the pin here. Let's do something. Provincial police force. Let's do it. Talk. Wonder why Paul Hinman's coming up your flank, Premier Kenny? Because all you do is talk. And it's going to cost you. So enough, get on with those things. And those don't mean taking on secessionism. I mean, you can frame it the way I believe Canada is broken. I believe eventually one of these Western provinces has to vote and get out. But we need to get ourselves into a position and a condition in order to do so first. And a lot of these things, steps within the Fair Deal panel, for example, are the ways to do it over time. But some other people can look at it the same way of taking on some of these things as the way to avoid secession. It's the way to make provinces comfortable within Canada because they can, exercise their own autonomy within the nation and still be comfortable within it. But by doing nothing, the tensions are only going to get stronger. And the support for outright independence, so maybe it's not such a bad thing, but is only going to get stronger. So I don't know with Kenny. If it's for Canada first, I don't think it's paying off for Canada in the long run because our regional divides are only getting stronger. And Doug Coates saying Kenny's not going forward the way Quebec is because he wants to be PM one day. And if Alberta has that many rights, it'll be impossible for him to control. So that's interesting, because nobody hates provincial rights more than a prime minister because when you've got crotchety premiers, it's difficult to deal with them when they've got autonomy to deal with. And unless it's Quebec and they'll just do anything and everything they say. I don't know if he's really got that. I mean, Kenny's got ambition, but he's no fool. I mean, he's got his hands full just trying to get a second term as premier at this point. In Canada's history, we've never had anybody go from premier to prime minister. It's never happened yet. It's not to say it can't happen, but that's not the best path to go with it. I think if Kenny had wanted to go for the PM's chair, he would have been better served. And strategically, he hasn't been that great lately, but he tends to be pretty smart in looking ahead. He would have been wiser even just to put in another term in opposition as a member of parliament and start getting his things in stage to run for the leadership federally whilst within that party rather than coming from outside as a premier later. But who knows? That might be his goal, but I really think he's kind of, the bus is taken off on him on that one. If that was his goal at this point, it's just trying to go down in history as a premier who can manage to win a second term, which we haven't had in a long time in Alberta. They haven't been doing well. Stelmach, Redford, Prentice, Notley, they're all getting wiped out in their first terms. And Kenny is not looking like he's going to buck that trend if he keeps going down the path that he is. The Albertan saying that the purpose of the Fair Deal panel was to pacify separatist sentiment. Kenny again, offended CPC base. Yeah, it could be true. I do believe it was there to pacify the regionalism. If he's not going forward with it, then yeah, it was just kicking the can down the road. You know, if you're not going to actually implement it, it's nothing. It's fluff. It's crap. It's wasting our time, and it's not pacifying us. You know, I mean, that's part of it. I was talking to Jeff the other day at Callaway, and he's right. You know, in that. Perhaps Kenny's just been in Ottawa too long. I mean, that's a city, that's a government where they just feel that you just deal with everything with committees and commissions and you never actually really do anything. And that does kind of fit with things. But that doesn't work out here. We don't want more commissions. We don't want to talk more. We want to see some substantial action. And he hasn't done any. And again, the Wild Rose Party is gaining the benefits of that. Something they have done. I'm gonna go on to a conversation I want to have is the opioid epidemic, and this has been hitting the news. So there was some terrible overdoses up in Edmonton in a park near an area where there was a safe consumption site. You know, and there's discussions come up, and the gross, sick politics being played. Because now, yes, after much study, they're talking about shutting down the safe consumption site down the Sheldon Schumer Center. And there's literally the same old jerks. Oh, there's going to be blood on Kenny's hands. He's going to kill people. People are going to die. Okay. You know, and then they forget that they're also talking about opening 2 more safe consumption sites to make up for it. Okay. He's looking to close that one. The safe consumption sites, as far as I'm concerned, are an experiment. And for the most part, they've been failing. Okay. They're not working as they were supposed to. And like so many things, there hasn't been a cost-benefit analysis done with the placement of these things. So I am sensitive to the opioid epidemic. We've got to deal with this. This is a big problem. This is a bigger problem than the bloody COVID-19, and we aren't hearing enough about it. The overdoses are going crazy. The rates of addictions are through the roof. I've gone on about it a number of times going downtown. You see it down there. The term I use is constantly is dystopian. I was in the offices late last night. I didn't get out on 7th Avenue until 9 o'clock. And the train platform reminded me, I mean, it was on 7th Avenue, it was just loaded with all of these junkies collected together. No normal person is going to join that group to ride on a train or wait for a train. It was scary. This is what it's come to. And we need to address it. And I don't want to lay it all on these addicts. These are troubled people, and they're human beings. These are somebody's daughters and sons, uncles and nephews. People fall into that trap of addiction for a number of reasons. They aren't always coming from an environment you would anticipate, not necessarily from a broken household or a native reserve or anything. They can be anybody. Anybody can get into that mess. And it's really damn hard to get out. And again, a little area I'll give Kenny credit for, they've put money into getting more treatment beds. Myself, I'm a recovering alcoholic. I spent a lot of time in church basements drinking crappy coffee all through the States when I was working down there and up in Canada. It gave me a social network. One of the things you do learn as an addict of any kind is very few of them can stop by themselves. They need help. They need help. They can't just quit. It's not as simple as that. You know, you've got to learn to live with whatever that substance or activity was that you were filling a void with. It takes a lot of therapy. It takes a lot of time. And it takes a lot of money. Addictions treatment is expensive. Detox is expensive. And Kenny's moved into those beds. Now, I'm not fully against safe consumption centers. The thing is, you got to keep them alive long enough to get them in to save them. There's absolute truth to that. If they're dead, there's nothing else we can do. That's the final stage. But those alone, if you don't couple it with treatment, you're just prolonging the inevitable. You know, that was one of the lines from AA that was constant. If you keep on the path you're going, you're either going to be dead or in jail. And it's true. And we're seeing it with these addicts. And to say that those ones who died in the park died because of the local safe injection site being closed, come on, spare me. You know, seeing it, we put that out. We put that video out here with a guy consuming meth right on an LRT. You know, I saw syringes in LRT stations I post pictures of. We have had the safe injection centers. It doesn't mean the addict is going to go to it. Some of them are. And that leads to some of the other problems too. Because yes, when you've got them collected around there, now you've got the social hub for the addicted people, and they need that. They need lives too. Well, the dealers follow them. Now you've got dealers in a neighborhood, and the addicts need money to buy the drugs. So what happens? Crime shoots through the roof in the neighborhood. And if they're hanging around the safe consumption center where they are in that residential area, yes, that means that every bicycle and barbecue and loose change and anything they can get at, they're taking it. They're desperate. They're addicted. They will take anything. They will steal the gold from your teeth to get their next fix. For those fortunate enough never to have felt serious withdrawal symptoms, good. You aren't missing anything. It's bloody tough. And I have never gotten to that point of things like those opioids and meth. I can't imagine. Liquor was bad enough, and cigarettes. So we got to get these people treated and quit pointing fingers and blaming and throwing that bullshit of saying, go, Kenny's going to have blood on his hands. The Lethbridge Center was corrupt, and that was an injection site, safe consumption. We've got to look at the whole picture. And these consumption sites, they've put way too much stock into them. There's a whole degree, again, of leftist naivety that comes into it. I listen to other crap where they talk about what these people, what they need is more housing. Nenshis love that one. We just need more housing. Get them off the streets. They need more housing. Do you think that guy shambling down the streets with crap running down his leg, talking at birds in the air, just needs an apartment? This is a person in extreme trouble. They need treatment. They need a lot. I mean, whether it's mental health or addiction, and those are both tightly tied together. The problem is most people who ended up addicted actually needed mental health treatment, and they self-medicated with whatever might be at hand. So let's look bigger. So don't talk about having more houses and people are dying in the streets because Kenny didn't pay for enough affordable housing. It's not that. And don't say these people are dying of overdoses because there weren't enough safe consumption centers around. It's not that. We have those things, and the overdoses are going up. A lot. They've doubled in just a year and a half. Some of that's related to the lockdowns, but it's a big growing problem. Quit pointing crap ass fingers of blame on your partisan basis out of your loathing of Kenny, and let's look at real solutions here. And he's been the first premier in a while to talk about adding thousands of treatment beds, which is what we need. These guys and women need treatment. I mean, for people in Calgary, if you see those addicts walking up and down, what do they call them? Curb crawlers. They're panhandling when you're waiting at a long light. The one over by Chinook Center. If you want to do a people watching endeavor, go out there and watch. And you look behind the Home Depot. That's kind of the main gathering area for them over by the Chinook LRT station. These guys practically do it in shifts. They will walk up and down that curb and panhandle from cars until they've got enough money. The dealer is waiting behind the Home Depot. They leave the curb, another one comes out, fills the spot. That one goes out and gets their crap. And I don't know how many times I've seen, it's come out like when I get extra time and so on, I drive Uber. Just digressing for a moment. This is what I like doing. It's relaxing. I talk to people. I make a few extra bucks. The flexibility is great. Not making millions, but it's good. But it also gives me an opportunity to really get out in the city streets. And I work night shifts, I work day shifts, I get out there. The amount of times that Chinook Center overpass that I've seen the fire trucks and the ambulances there for the overdoses, I can't count how many. Because that's what happens. They get off that curb, they go behind the Home Depot, they buy their junk, they consume it, often to get into a warmer spot on those steps with that little overpass, and they die. Or if somebody gets there fast enough, they can be revived so they can panhandle some more and take some more drugs until they die. It's real. And it's not in safe consumption centers. Remember, they're down by Chinook. Like, you can't force these addicts to always just go to that spot. That provides a little bit of a hub for some of them, but it's not nearly anything close to a solution. I've taken to actually carrying a naloxone kit in my car because I see so many incidents. I haven't used it yet. Maybe I'll be in the right place at the right time. Maybe for some poor addict who was overdosed, it would be, if I could be there at the right time and bring them out of it, it'll be their final straw and they go into treatment. I don't know. I don't want to dismiss the lives of these addicts. I really want them saved. It's better for all of us. It's better if they get recovered, they get functional, get into the working world. But it's going to take investment, time, money, treatment, not just bloody safe injection sites. It's turned into a almost religious thing with these safe for consumption sites. And they talk about how many lives they've saved. Really? Because you've seen so many overdoses that you managed to be on hand to give the naloxone on the spot. Yeah, it's true. but then chances are they wander off and unfortunately they overdose somewhere else later because they're still an addict. You've just held it off. And I'm not saying there's no place for these sites. It's just that we've got to examine them. We've got to examine them critically. And it's not being cruel. It's not trying to kill people. It's not being, nasty and vicious to say sometimes that these might not be working, or at least not in the locations they are, or not in the way they are. This is one of those areas where we really, and I'm a partisan guy, I'm not a member of a party anymore, but I take sides and things, and I'm certainly can be nasty on it. Should not be a partisan issue. Guess what? Addiction, homelessness, it affects and mental health issues, everybody, left, right, and center. We all get hit by it. Some family member somewhere, you yourself might be. Kenny has been taking a good approach on this. Let's give him credit where it's due. Don't let these crazy jackasses talk about him theoretically killing people because he's re-examining the safe consumption sites. And he's looking more towards a treatment-based model. We need to treat these guys. It's for all of us. And then we get the Albertan saying, Ward 1 candidate Jacob McGregor has been raising the problem with mental health. He would be an interesting fellow to talk to. He's a young guy. I've seen him out campaigning. Thank you. I'm going to reach out to him, actually. And Ward 1, I believe that's Ward Sutherland's ward. That's an area that really needs a new councillor. Ward Sutherland is just vile. We just mistakes that get made. City council needs a heavy duty flush, and you can't flush half a toilet and get benefit. You need to flush practically all of them. Aside from Sean Chu, I can't see many councillors I want to see in there for another term right now. And Ward 1 is a big one of them that needs a change. So I'll definitely reach out to Jacob and see if he wants to talk about that. But either way, it's an issue that troubles me, whether from a pure policy standpoint, because the money that's expended. I mean, if these addicts aren't dying, they're in jail. It's expensive to keep them incarcerated, and jail isn't rehab. Jail isn't where you're going to get off it. That's just where you're going to get more dysfunctional at great cost, and perhaps learn better means of committing crimes once you get out. So from a pure shallow policy sense, though, we would save money by treating these people, getting them off this crap, getting them working, getting them paying taxes. And from a human standpoint, I hate seeing it. I hate driving out there and seeing more and more of these people shambling along, addicted, miserable. They are not happy. They're not out there having a good time. You might see them dancing sometimes in the streets. It's because they're wasted on something. But, one of the most depressing things when you can tell a homeless person, it isn't how they're dressed. It isn't, how unwashed they might be or that they're pushing a shopping cart. It's the way they walk. You ever notice their head is always down? They're always looking at the ground. These are people that are really suffering. They are not going through life and having a good time. And we're seeing more and more of them, and eventually they die. I want to see that end. Let's talk about conservatives are always called heartless and this and that. Well, no, we aren't. We aren't. And remember the old term, compassionate conservatives. We want to take care of those who can't take care of themselves, not those who won't take care of themselves, those who can't. Addicts can't take care of themselves. They need help. And safe consumption sites are just one small little phase of it, and they're not a be-all and end-all. And let's not let the harpies, the idiots, the shallow, scream it down when Kenny is re-examining. And he's done it carefully. There was a lot of study on that Sheldon Schumer Center spot on whether it's working or whether it's not. It wasn't an arbitrary decision, and they're going to make up for it with a couple of other locations. So let's not let the shrill partisan voices give Kenny crap on that one. Let's give him credit when he gets something right and he's going the right way. Listen to the people who are saying he's doing something stupid. Rachel Notley, the mayor of Edmonton, the mayor of Calgary. How often do those people go into those parts of town? How often do they walk around on there? Or how often do they drive around on a night shift like I do, just to see how bad it is? To see them passing out, see the ambulances, the fire trucks, the constant overdoses. We've got a big problem. And to tie it into your partisan ambitions is just sick. And again, I guess that blind opposition out of Notley that I think everybody's getting tired of. Be supportive of some things. Sometimes he's right, okay? Sometimes Jason Kenney is right. And getting more treatment beds for these guys and moving away from this looking as if a safe consumption sites are some sort of panacea. We can hopefully address this because this issue is getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Either way, that's enough ranting out of me for today. That was a great chat with Caylan Ford. I thank you for the questions and suggestions and other guests. And by the way, I always welcome guest suggestions. It's a part of the fun of doing this live show, is getting these comments and feedback and interaction with viewers. But part of the hard part is scheduling people in and getting them on as guests, because they have limited schedules and you're live and you only have so many windows. So if there's people you want to hear from or you think it'd be interesting, send me an email, cmorgan@westernstandardonline.com. Give me a heads up. I'll see about getting them on. We can talk, we can examine issues, and we can do things. This is a developing thing with the Standard. We're increasing our digital presence. Our news stories, our columns have been doing great. And now we're doing these shows. Nadine Wellwood's been doing those fantastic interviews and specials and so on, and reporting from spots. Dave does the excellent news work, and so many other writers. Now we're working on this, and we've got Nathan Gita, who does this show at the same time slot as me on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. We're filling that void where talk radio is dying away, and spread the word. Let's get this going. Let's get these guests. Let's get these sponsors. We can communicate. We can bypass the censors, and we can still talk some common sense out here. There's room for it. And getting back to the sponsors. So these guys who have the CCFR taking on the sponsorship for the Western Standard, they're doing some really good work. So don't forget, nobody works harder for gun owners than the Canadian Coalition for Firearm Rights. The CCFR, they're suing the federal government on behalf of gun owners. So become a member or donate to their legal fund. Go to firearmrights.ca and click Why Join. So just to repeat, for those who are listening through the podcast, firearmrights.ca. And this is a great group. They're standing up for our firearm rights. We need them out there doing it, and they're sponsoring us at the Western Standard so we can keep producing these shows, keep talking about these things. And be sure to go in and check them out. Subscribe to the Western Standard if you haven't already. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, our Facebook page. This is where you can get these updates, get these shows as they're coming out. And share it, help spread the words. Use your social media networks. We can really build a great alternative media source here. We've been doing it excellently so far. Derek's doing a great job building this thing from the ground up. It's only going to go further and upward from here. So thank you all for listening and tuning in today. Monday, I will be back at 10 o'clock with more ranting, more news, and more guests. So y'all have a good one.